Get a job and stop being a leech." The words hung in the air like poison at our Thanksgiving table. My daughter-in-law, Brenda, had finally said aloud what her eyes had been screaming for months. The room froze as everyone stared at their plates, except David, my son, who looked mortified. I surprised everyone when I burst out laughing. What Brenda didn't know was that I was worth $8 million. So I simply replied, "Sweetheart, find yourself a new place to live." The look of shock on her face was absolutely priceless. My name is Ivy Matthews, and at 65 years old, I never expected to be called a leech by anyone, let alone my own daughter-in-law. My late husband Jack passed away 3 years ago, after 40 years of marriage. What most people don't know, including my own children, is that I built a very successful interior design business that catered to wealthy clients in Boston and New York. Jack was old-fashioned and asked me to keep my success quiet. He was proud of me, but he felt uncomfortable with people knowing his wife made more money than he did. Out of respect for his wishes, I maintained a modest public persona. After Jack died, I decided to continue honoring his wishes about my financial status. I wanted to see who truly cared about me versus who might be interested in what I could do for them financially. I downsized from our large colonial home to a comfortable but modest condo, banking the difference. My investment portfolio had been carefully managed over decades, and between that and my business proceeds, I found myself quite comfortably set with just over $8 million in assets. My son David married Brenda 6 years ago. Initially, she was charming and attentive. She would call regularly to check on me, invite me over for dinner, and seemed genuinely interested in being part of the family. I was thrilled that my son had found someone who appeared to value family connections. The first 2 years of their marriage, our relationship was pleasant. Brenda would seek my advice about gardening, cooking, and even career decisions. I happily shared what I knew and enjoyed our growing relationship. Things began to change subtly after they purchased their new house 3 years ago. What David didn't know was that I had contributed $200,000 toward their down payment as a private gift to them, but asked the lawyer to keep my contribution anonymous. I simply wanted them to have a good start without feeling indebted to me. Brenda started canceling our lunch dates. When we did get together, she would make odd comments about how difficult it must be to live on Social Security. I never corrected her assumption that my modest lifestyle meant financial struggle. She began suggesting senior discount programs and part-time jobs that might be suitable for a woman my age. At first, I found it mildly amusing, but as time passed, her tone grew increasingly condescending. Last Christmas, I overheard Brenda telling her mother that she was concerned about me becoming financially dependent on them. I nearly choked on my eggnog. By spring, she was making comments within earshot about elderly parents becoming burdens on their children. By summer, she had started excluding me from family gatherings, telling David I had declined invitations I had never received. David and I had always been close, but I noticed him becoming more distant. When we did speak, he seemed uncomfortable, often changing the subject when money or future plans came up. I suspected Brenda was feeding him concerns about me becoming their responsibility. Despite my growing discomfort around Brenda, I accepted their Thanksgiving invitation. Family is important to me, and I wasn't going to be pushed out without good reason. I spent considerable time selecting thoughtful gifts for everyone, including a beautiful cashmere sweater for Brenda that I knew matched her eyes perfectly. The week before Thanksgiving, my old friend Susan called me in a state of confusion. She wanted to know if I was all right financially. When I asked why she was concerned, she revealed something that made my blood run cold. Brenda had approached her at church and discreetly asked if I had requested money from her. According to Brenda, I had been asking various friends and family members for loans, but was too embarrassed to tell David. Susan, being a true friend, wanted to check with me directly before believing such a story. I was stunned into silence. This wasn't just Brenda making assumptions about my finances. This was active character assassination. As I hung up the phone, another call came in. It was my nephew Patrick, with nearly the identical story. By the end of the day, I had received 3 more calls from family members and friends. All had been approached by Brenda with the same fabricated tale of my financial desperation. That was the moment I knew Thanksgiving would be more eventful than anyone in the family anticipated. Thanksgiving Day arrived crisp and sunny. I dressed carefully in a tailored navy pantsuit with a silk blouse and pearl necklace that had been my mother's. I wanted to look polished and confident. I loaded my car with the carefully wrapped gifts and a homemade cranberry pie that had always been David's favorite. When I arrived at their colonial-style home on Maple Street, I had to admire what they had done with the property. The landscaping was immaculate, with professionally designed gardens that must have cost a small fortune. David greeted me at the door with a quick kiss on the cheek. He seemed nervous, his eyes darting between me and the interior of the house. Brenda was in the kitchen, surrounded by stainless steel appliances that hadn't been there the last time I visited. She wore a designer apron that still had the price tag partially visible underneath. Her greeting was cool but polite. I handed her the pie, which she placed in the refrigerator without comment. The living room had been completely redecorated since my last visit just 2 months ago. A massive sectional sofa in buttery leather dominated the space, and an enormous flat-screen television covered most of one wall. Original artwork that I recognized from a gallery in Boston hung on another wall. I knew the piece cost upwards of $15,000 because the artist was a client of mine. David's sister Laura and her husband Tom arrived shortly after me. Laura embraced me warmly, while Tom shook my hand with genuine affection. They had always been kind to me, and I treasured their steady presence in family gatherings. Brenda's parents, Walter and Nancy, were the last to arrive. Walter was a loud, backslapping type who worked in car sales. Nancy was quieter, but had the same calculating eyes as her daughter. Throughout the elaborate dinner preparations, Brenda made a point of mentioning the cost of various items. The free-range turkey was from a specialty farm. The china was from her recent trip to France. The wine was a rare vintage that Walter had procured through a special connection. Each statement seemed designed to underscore their financial success and sophistication. When we finally sat down to dinner in their formal dining room, I noticed the table had been extended to its full length, placing me at the furthest point from David. The seating arrangement felt deliberate in its subtle message of my peripheral importance to the family. David carved the turkey, while Brenda directed the passing of dishes with the efficiency of an air traffic controller. The conversation flowed awkwardly, with long pauses and abrupt changes of subject. Walter dominated with stories of difficult customers and golf games with wealthy clients. Nancy kept smoothing her napkin and readjusting her jewelry, a nervous habit that made the diamonds on her fingers catch the light. The first pointed comment came during a discussion of the local economy. Walter mentioned a friend who had been laid off from a management position. "It's just awful how people find themselves struggling financially at our age," Brenda said, looking directly at me. "Some people just don't plan properly for retirement, and then they become burdens on their families." I took a sip of water and smiled pleasantly. The comment hung in the air until Laura changed the subject. Minutes later, Brenda mentioned their plans to renovate their master bathroom. Tom innocently asked about the cost of such a project. "It's significant," Brenda replied. "But David and I believe in investing in our home. Not everyone understands the importance of being financially independent and building equity." Again, her eyes flicked meaningfully toward me. By the time dessert was served, the tension was thick enough to slice with the ornate cake knife Brenda wielded like a weapon. She had rejected my pie in favor of a store-bought cheesecake that she announced had been specially ordered from an exclusive bakery downtown. Laura attempted to diffuse the growing tension by asking about my recent volunteer work at the community center. I'd been teaching art classes to children twice a week, something that brought me genuine joy. "That's wonderful, Mom," David said, the first warmth I'd heard in his voice all evening. Brenda placed her fork down with a sharp clink against her plate. "I think it's wonderful too," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. But don't you think it might be time to find something that actually pays? The economy being what it is, everyone needs to contribute. No one can afford to just take from others indefinitely. Walter chuckled uncomfortably. Brenda, honey, I don't think. I'm just saying what everyone is thinking, Brenda continued. We all know Ivy has been struggling since Jack died. There are plenty of retail positions that hire seniors these days. Walmart is always looking for greeters. David cleared his throat. Brenda, this isn't the time. When is the time, David? Brenda snapped. When she's moved in with us because she can't afford her rent? When we're paying for her medications? When she's completely depleted whatever savings your father left her? I felt every eye at the table on me. My hands remained steady as I placed my napkin beside my plate. Brenda turned to me, her face flushed with what appeared to be righteous indignation. I'm sorry, Ivy, but someone needs to have this conversation. You're 65 years old and capable of working. We can't keep pretending that everything is fine when you're clearly in financial trouble. Why else would you be asking our friends and family for loans behind our backs? A collective gasp went around the table. Laura started to protest, but Brenda wasn't finished. She stood up, her voice rising to a near shout. Get a job and stop being a leech. The dining room fell into stunned silence. Nancy covered her mouth with her hand. Walter stared at his plate. Tom placed a protective hand on Laura's shoulder. David looked as though he'd been slapped. And then, to everyone's astonishment, including my own, I burst out laughing. Not a nervous titter or a polite chuckle, but genuine, unrestrained laughter that bubbled up from deep inside me. The release felt wonderful, after months of enduring Brenda's thinly veiled contempt. When I finally composed myself, I smiled at the confused faces around me. Brenda, honey, there's something I should probably tell you. I reached into my handbag and pulled out a folder containing recent bank statements and investment portfolios. I slid them across the table. What you don't know is that I've been paying your mortgage for the past year. David called me in tears last December when you maxed out your credit cards on Christmas gifts and couldn't make the payment. I've been quietly covering it ever since while you two got back on your feet. Brenda's face drained of color. Her mouth opened and closed without sound. I could see David's eyes widen in recognition of the truth. He'd sworn me to secrecy, not wanting Brenda to know they'd needed help. In his defense, he believed it was a loan, not realizing I never intended to ask for repayment. I continued calmly. That beautiful house you're so proud of? I contributed $200,000 toward the down payment as a gift. The renovation of the kitchen last spring? I paid for half of it. So, before you call anyone a leech, perhaps you should consider who has actually been supporting whom. The silence that followed my statement was deafening. Brenda remained standing, her knuckles white, where she gripped the edge of the table. David had gone completely pale, his eyes fixed on the financial documents in front of him. What's going on? Walter demanded, breaking the silence. Brenda, what is she talking about? I continued in the same calm voice. Since it appears we're having an honest conversation about finances, I might as well tell you all the complete truth. I'm worth just over $8 million. That's ridiculous, Brenda sputtered, finding her voice at last. If you had that kind of money, you wouldn't be living in that tiny condo and driving a 5-year-old car. I smiled. Those are choices, Brenda, not necessities. Some of us don't measure our worth by the things we own. I opened the folder and passed around documentation of my assets. Investment accounts, business holdings, property deeds, and bank statements. As the papers made their way around the table, expressions changed from disbelief to astonishment. While everyone examined the evidence of my financial status, I explained how Jack and I had agreed to keep my business success private. After his death, I decided to continue the practice to see who valued me for myself rather than my money. Mom, why didn't you tell me? David asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Would it have changed how you treated me? I asked gently. His eyes filled with tears as he realized the implication of my question. Of course it wouldn't, he said. You're my mother. Brenda was rapidly shifting from shock to damage control. She forced a laugh that sounded more like a bark. This is all some kind of joke, right? These papers could be fake. Anyone could print these up. Laura, who worked in banking, shook her head. These are legitimate, Brenda. Look at the watermarks and account numbers. These statements are real. Brenda's mother, Nancy, had become very still, her eyes calculating as she reassessed me. Why would you keep this a secret? She finally asked. I wanted authentic relationships, I replied simply. I wanted to know who would value me for who I am, not what I could give them. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be financially secure, Brenda said defensively. You made us think you were struggling. I never said I was struggling, I corrected her. You assumed that, based on my lifestyle choices. And then you told others I was asking for loans, which was an outright lie. Brenda flushed. I was just concerned about you. David had been silently flipping through the papers. He stopped suddenly, holding up a document. What's this? He asked, pointing to a transaction record. I leaned forward to see what Head found. That shows the monthly mortgage payments I've been making on your behalf for the past year. That's not what this looks like, David said slowly. This shows payments from my trust account being transferred to a separate account in Brenda's name. Trust account? I asked, confused. I never set up a trust account for you. My father did, David said. Before he died, he established trusts for Laura and me. It was supposed to be for our retirement or emergencies. I felt my heart sink. Jack had never told me about these trusts. That wasn't something I was making payments from. I have my own accounts for that. Brenda had gone very still, her eyes darting between David and the door. David turned to her, his voice dangerously quiet. Brenda, have you been withdrawing money from my trust fund without telling me? The room collectively held its breath. Brenda attempted a dismissive laugh. Don't be ridiculous. It's our money. Why wouldn't I use it for our expenses? Because we agreed that money was untouchable, David replied, his voice rising. It was for emergencies only. You told me we were paying for all these renovations from your bonus at work. I did get a bonus, Brenda insisted. Not enough for a $15,000 painting, David countered, pointing to the artwork on the wall. Or a $30,000 kitchen renovation. Or this dining room set that you said was on sale but I just saw cost $12,000 on this bank statement. The confrontation was escalating beyond the original issue. I decided it was time to bring things back to the immediate matter at hand. Regardless of where the money came from, I said firmly, the fact remains that Brenda has been spreading lies about me to friends and family. She has treated me with contempt while knowing full well that you two were struggling financially, and now we've discovered she's been secretly withdrawing from David's trust fund. I stood up and gathered my purse. David, I love you, and I'll always be here for you. But I cannot, and will not, be treated this way by anyone, especially not family. I turned to Brenda, who was now visibly trembling. Sweetheart, find yourself a new place to live. This house is partially mine, and I no longer wish to subsidize someone who has shown me such disrespect. You can't do that, Brenda gasped. This is our house. Check the deed, I suggested. I'm listed as a 25% owner, a condition of my gift toward the down payment. Your lawyer should have explained that to you. David looked shocked. Is that true? He asked Brenda. Her silence was answer enough. 48 hours, I said calmly. That's how long you have to apologize sincerely and make amends. After that, I'll be exercising my rights as a property owner. As I walked toward the door, I heard David say in a stunned voice, You told me your parents gave us that down payment money. I paused at the doorway and turned back. One more thing you should know, David. When I die, my entire estate will be going to charitable organizations that support women in business and the arts. I had planned to leave a significant portion to you and Laura, but after today, I'm reconsidering how that might be allocated. I suggest you both review your financial situations very carefully in the coming weeks." With that, I walked out, got in my car, and drove home to my modest but comfortable condo that I owned outright. For the first time in months, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The truth was finally out. And now we would all have to deal with the consequences of our choices. The next morning, I woke to a flurry of text messages and missed calls. Laura had sent 3 messages, expressing her shock and support. Tom had called twice, leaving voicemails, asking if I needed anything. Even Brenda's father, Walter, had texted a brief but telling message. "Never liked how she spoke to you. Sorry about that." David hadn't reached out. I wasn't surprised. He had a lot to process, and likely a very difficult conversation happening at home. I made myself a cup of tea and sat on my balcony overlooking the small community park below. Children were already playing on the swings, their laughter carrying up to me on the crisp November breeze. Around noon, Laura called again, and this time I answered. "Mom, are you okay?" she asked immediately. "That was the most dramatic Thanksgiving in family history, and we've had some doozies." I couldn't help but laugh. "I'm fine, honey. How are you and Tom holding up?" "We're still processing." David called Tom at 6 this morning. "Has a mess, Mom." I felt a pang of guilt. Despite everything, he was still my son, and I hated to see him hurt. "Is he angry with me?" I asked quietly. Laura paused. "Not with you. Hes furious with Brenda. After you left, he demanded to see all their financial records. Turns out she's been hiding a lot more than just withdrawals from his trust fund. They have credit card debt you wouldn't believe. And get this. She never got that promotion at work that she claimed justified all their recent spending. She's been at the same level for 2 years. My heart sank for my son. And Hes? Staying at your place now?" "Yes." He showed up at midnight with a suitcase and his laptop. Brenda apparently went ballistic when he started questioning her about their finances. She threw a vase at him. "Mom, the one Grandma Ellis left him, it's shattered." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the situation. That vase had been in the family for 3 generations. Is he safe? Physically, yes. Emotionally, he's a wreck. He keeps saying he should have seen the signs, should have known something was wrong when she kept pushing him to distance himself from you. I sighed. Manipulation is insidious, Laura. It happens slowly, in small steps that seem reasonable in the moment. I should have been more direct with him about my concerns. "He wants to see you," Laura said. "But he's ashamed. He thinks you must hate him for how he's treated you these past few years." "I could never hate him. He's my son." "That's what I told him. Will you talk to him if he calls?" "Of course I will." We chatted a bit longer, with Laura filling me in on the aftermath at Brenda's parents' house. Apparently, Nancy had been mortified by her daughter's behavior and was demanding explanations that Brenda wasn't providing. After ending the call with Laura, I decided to take action. I called my longtime lawyer, Patricia Goldman, who had helped manage my business affairs for over 20 years. I explained the situation and asked her to prepare documentation regarding my partial ownership of David's house. I wanted to be prepared for whatever came next. 2 hours later, my doorbell rang. It was David, looking exhausted and at least 5 years older than he had the day before. His eyes were red-rimmed, his normally neat hair disheveled. I opened my arms without a word, and he fell into them like he used to do as a little boy after a bad day at school. We stood in my entryway for a long moment, both of us silently acknowledging the pain and confusion of the past 24 hours. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he finally whispered against my shoulder. I believed her. I let her come between us. I led him to the living room and made us both some coffee. As we sat on my comfortable but modest sofa, David began to unravel the tangled web Brenda had woven over the past few years. "She told me you were constantly hinting about needing money," he explained. "That you were too proud to ask directly, but kept mentioning how expensive your medications were, how your heater broke down, how you might need to take out a reverse mortgage." "None of that was true," I said gently. "I never said any of those things." He nodded miserably. I know that now. And the truth is, we were the ones struggling. Brenda kept pushing for more and more expensive things: the house renovations, the luxury car, the vacations. When I said we couldn't afford it, she'd get upset and say I didn't value her enough. Then suddenly she'd announce we had enough money after all, and I'd be so relieved that the fighting would stop that I didn't question where the money was coming from. I took his hand in mine. "Oh, David, I'm so sorry you've been going through this alone." "That's not even the worst of it," he said, his voice dropping. "After you left last night, I started really digging into our finances. I found statements for credit cards I didn't know existed. Multiple accounts, all maxed out. And I found receipts for storage units I never knew about. 3 of them, in different parts of the city. Something cold settled in my stomach. What was in them?" David ran a hand through his hair. "I went to look this morning. One of them is filled with shopping bags. Dozens of them, still with tags on the clothes inside. Designer stuff worth thousands. The second one has furniture and artwork that never made it to our house. But the third one—" He hesitated, clearly struggling with what Head discovered. "What was in the third one?" I prompted gently. "Grandma's silverware," he whispered. "The pieces that went missing last year that Brenda said must have been accidentally thrown out during the kitchen renovation. And Dad's watches. And your mother's jewelry box that you thought you had misplaced during your move. It's all there, Mom, along with a lot of other family items I didn't even know were missing." I felt physically ill. Those items weren't particularly valuable financially, but they were irreplaceable in terms of sentimental worth. My mother's jewelry box contained handwritten notes from my father from when they were dating. Jack's watches were his prized possessions, including one his own father had given him when he graduated from college. Why would she store them instead of selling them? I wondered aloud. David looked up, his eyes haunted. "Some of them have been sold. I found receipts from pawn shops and estate buyers. The rest. I think she was keeping them as leverage or insurance. Or maybe she just liked having things that mattered to us. I don't know anymore. I feel like I've been living with a stranger." I made a decision then. "I'm calling Patricia to send over a private investigator I know. We need to understand exactly what we've been dealing with." David nodded numbly. "There's more, Mom. When I confronted Brenda about all this last night, she said something strange. She said, 'This isn't the first time I've had to start over, and it won't be the last.' Like she's done this before." The next week was a whirlwind of discoveries. The private investigator, a retired police detective named Frank Moretti, worked quickly and thoroughly. What he uncovered left us all stunned. Brenda Thompson was actually born Belinda Thompson in a small town in Oregon. She had changed her name slightly after her first marriage ended in divorce. That husband, a successful surgeon named Stephen Williams, had mysteriously lost most of his fortune in bad investments that Belinda had encouraged. Her second marriage to a real estate developer in Arizona had ended similarly, with the man filing for bankruptcy within 3 years of their wedding. She'd moved to our area 6 years ago and met David at a charity fundraiser just weeks after arriving. Their whirlwind romance had culminated in marriage after only 5 months of dating, barely enough time for us to get to know her. As Frank dug deeper, he discovered Brenda had a pattern. She targeted financially comfortable men, isolated them from family, gradually took control of their finances, and then either left with a significant settlement or stayed to drain their resources completely. "But why go after David?" I asked Frank during one of our update meetings. He was doing well but wasn't wealthy by any means, not compared to her previous husbands. Frank shuffled through his notes. "We think she found out about the trust fund early on. And also, given your husband's position in the community before his death, she probably assumed there would be a significant inheritance coming David's way." I nodded slowly. Jack had been well respected as the head of a local banking branch. His position would have suggested wealth to an outsider, even though we had chosen to live relatively modestly. While Frank continued his investigation, I received an unexpected visitor. Nancy, Brenda's mother, appeared at my door looking nervous and uncomfortable. "May I come in?" she asked, her voice lacking its usual confidence. I hesitated, but then stepped aside to let her enter. We sat in my living room in awkward silence until she finally spoke. "I owe you an apology, Ivy. I should have seen what Brenda was doing. Or maybe I did see it and chose to ignore it." I waited, letting her find her words. Nancy twisted her hands together. "This isn't the first time," she finally admitted. "Brenda has always been calculating. Even as a child, Walter and I tried to correct it, but she was so smart, always 3 steps ahead of us." She took a deep breath. "When she was in college, she was engaged to a boy's, father and son at the same time. Neither knew about the other until the weekend they were both planning to propose." My eyebrows shot up in surprise. "What happened?" "We paid them both to keep quiet and sent Brenda to a different school." She looked down at her hands. "We've been cleaning up her messes for years. But this is different. What she's done to your family. I don't think we can fix this." I studied Nancy's face, seeing genuine remorse. "Thank you for telling me this," I said quietly. "There's more," Nancy continued. "After your revelation at Thanksgiving, Walter and I confronted her. She laughed and said it didn't matter because she had another plan already in motion. She mentioned something about an insurance policy and said if David tried to divorce her, he'd regret it." A chill ran through me. "What kind of insurance policy?" Nancy shook her head. "I don't know." But the way she said it frightened me. I've never been afraid of my own daughter before. I thanked Nancy for her warning and immediately called Frank to relay this new information. He promised to look into what Brenda might have meant by an insurance policy. The answer came 3 days later in a shocking discovery. Frank had found evidence that Brenda had been in contact with someone from my past, a disgruntled former employee who had been fired for embezzlement. The two had met several times over the past few months, and according to text messages Frank had somehow obtained, Brenda was gathering information to fabricate allegations of business fraud against me if David tried to leave her. The depth of her planning and malice was staggering. She hadn't just been stealing from us financially. She had been meticulously creating a scenario where she could potentially destroy my reputation and possibly even threaten my freedom if things didn't go her way. When I shared this with David, something in him finally broke. The last threads of his feelings for Brenda seemed to snap, replaced by a cold determination I had rarely seen in my gentle son. "Enough is enough," he said firmly. "It's time to end this." While David moved forward with divorce proceedings, Brenda launched a multi-pronged attack. First came the social media campaign. Posts appeared suggesting I had been mistreating her for years, that I was unstable and vindictive, that I had threatened to disinherit David if he didn't leave her. She painted herself as the victim of a controlling mother-in-law who couldn't let go of her son. Friends I had known for decades began calling, asking if I was okay, if the rumors about my mental state were true. Some local businesses where I had volunteered suddenly found reasons why they didn't need my help anymore. I even received concerned calls from my doctor and accountant, checking if I was really contemplating the rash financial decisions Brenda had hinted I was making. Next came the pregnancy announcement. Brenda called David in tears, claiming she had just discovered she was 8 weeks pregnant. Would he really abandon his own child? Couldn't they work things out for the sake of their baby? David, already suspicious of everything Brenda said, requested medical verification. She produced what looked like legitimate test results from her gynecologist. I suggested David contact the doctor directly, only to discover the office had no record of such tests. The documents, like so much else, had been fabricated. Then came the legal threats. Brenda hired an aggressive attorney who specialized in contentious divorces. Letters arrived accusing David of hiding assets, of emotional abuse, of abandonment. The same lawyer sent me a cease and desist letter, warning that my interference in my son's marriage constituted elder abuse and emotional manipulation. Frank advised us to document everything and to communicate with Brenda only in writing or with witnesses present. David moved all his belongings out of the house while Brenda was at work, leaving nothing of sentimental or financial value behind. Meanwhile, I decided it was time to reclaim what was mine. I asked Patricia to send formal letters requesting the return of all family heirlooms that had been discovered in the storage units. When no response came, I filed a police report for theft. 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, I received a call from Janet Moore, my former business partner who had taken over day-to-day operations of the design firm when I semi-retired. Janet and I had maintained a friendly relationship, speaking every few months to catch up. "Ivy, I need to tell you something that happened a few months ago," she said, her voice tight with concern. "A woman came to the office asking about you. She said she was doing research for a biography of successful women entrepreneurs in the area. She asked a lot of questions about the company's financial history, especially about the period when we were expanding rapidly in the early 90s. My heart sank. "Did you tell her anything?" Janet sighed. "I mentioned our audit issues from 93. You know, when that bookkeeper made all those classification errors that took forever to straighten out with the IRS. The audit had been a nightmare, though completely resolved in our favor. The bookkeeper had made genuine mistakes that looked suspicious, but were ultimately proven to be errors rather than fraud. Still, in the hands of someone like Brenda, that information could be twisted into something sinister," Janet continued. "I realized something was off when she kept pushing for details about whether you personally handled any of the questionable transactions. I shut down the conversation and had security escort her out. When I saw her photo on David's Facebook page a week later, I realized she was your daughter-in-law. I should have called you immediately, but I honestly forgot about it until I saw her name in the paper this morning." "Brenda's name in the paper? What do you mean?" "It's a small article in the business section. She's being recognized as a rising star in her company. There's a photo and everything." I thanked Janet for the information and immediately pulled up the article online. There was Brenda, smiling confidently in a designer suit, being celebrated for bringing in a major new client to her marketing firm. The client? Westlake Development, a company I recognized as one of the largest property developers in the region. The same company that owned the building where my design firm had its main office. The connection was too coincidental to ignore. I called Frank immediately. "I think she's trying to get to my business," I told him. "She's connecting with one of our landlords and has been digging into old financial issues." Frank promised to look into it. 2 days later, he confirmed my suspicions. Brenda had indeed been meeting with executives at Westlake, suggesting there might be advantages to having my design firm removed from their property. She had hinted at past financial irregularities and suggested that association with my company might pose reputational risks. It was time to bring everything out into the open. I called a family meeting at Laura's house, inviting David, Laura, Tom, and even Walter and Nancy. I also asked Patricia and Frank to attend, bringing all their documentation. The meeting was set for Saturday afternoon. I arrived early to help Laura prepare refreshments, though neither of us expected it to be a social occasion. By 3 o'clock, everyone had arrived except Brenda, who hadn't been invited. I laid out everything we had discovered. The financial deceptions, the stolen heirlooms, the false pregnancy, the attempts to undermine my business, and the fabricated allegations she was preparing to use against me. Walter looked physically ill as the evidence mounted. Nancy kept shaking her head, tears occasionally slipping down her cheeks. David sat stoically, only his white knuckles revealing the strain he was under. We were just discussing potential legal actions when the doorbell rang. Laura went to answer it and returned looking shaken. "It's Brenda," she announced. "And she's with a lawyer." Despite not being invited, Brenda had somehow learned of our meeting. She strode into the living room with the confidence of someone holding all the cards, a thin man with a briefcase following close behind. "How touching. A family gathering without me," Brenda said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I thought you might be talking about me, so I brought someone to make sure my interests are represented." Her lawyer stepped forward, introducing himself as Gregory Jenkins. He placed his briefcase on the coffee table and began removing documents. "Mrs. Matthews, he began formally, addressing me. My client has authorized me to inform you that she is prepared to file a lawsuit for defamation, elder abuse, alienation of affection, and intentional infliction of emotional distress unless certain conditions are met. I remained calm, looking to Patricia, who nodded slightly. And what conditions would those be? I asked. Jenkins handed me a document. First, a public retraction of the false allegations you have made against my client. Second, compensation in the amount of $2 million for the damage to her reputation and career. Third, your withdrawal from any ownership interest in the property she shares with her husband. And fourth, your written agreement to cease all contact with her and her husband. I scanned the document, then passed it to Patricia, without comment. She reviewed it quickly, her expression never changing. Mr. Jenkins, she finally said, your demands are based on a series of false premises and assumptions. My client has made no public allegations against Mrs. Thompson. Any statements made to family members in private are protected speech. Furthermore, your claims of elder abuse are particularly ironic given the documented evidence we have of your client's actions. She gestured to Frank, who opened his laptop and turned it to face Jenkins. On the screen was a video. It showed Brenda entering my condo using a key I hadn't provided her. The timestamp showed it was from just 3 days earlier, when I had been at a doctor's appointment. The video continued, showing Brenda systematically going through my desk, photographing documents, and then placing something in my medicine cabinet. What did you put in my medications? I asked, my voice steady, despite my shock. Brenda's face had gone pale. That video is illegally obtained, her lawyer sputtered. You had no right to place cameras in your home without informing visitors. Actually, Patricia countered, Miss Matthews installed those cameras after a series of items went missing from her home. She filed a police report 2 weeks ago, which authorized the surveillance. Would you care to explain to the officers what your client was placing in her medicine cabinet? As if on cue, Frank pulled out his phone and showed us a close-up image captured from the video. It showed Brenda holding a small bottle of clear liquid near my prescription bottles. It's allergy medicine, Brenda said quickly. I was trying to help. Ivy mentioned having seasonal allergies. David made a strangled sound. Mom hasn't had allergies a day in her life. That's been your excuse for sneezing every spring. The room fell silent as the implication hung in the air. Had Brenda been planning to tamper with my medications? The thought sent a chill through everyone present. You're all against me, Brenda suddenly shouted, her composure cracking. You've never accepted me, never thought I was good enough. I was trying to build a life for us, David, a better life than your mother ever gave you. By stealing from us? David asked incredulously. By lying to everyone? By trying to poison my mother? Don't be so dramatic, Brenda snapped. It wasn't poison. It would just make her confused enough that you all would finally see she needs supervision, that she can't live alone anymore, that she needs me to take care of her finances. The calculated coldness of her plan stunned us all into silence. It was Nancy who finally spoke up. Brenda, enough, she said quietly. It's over. You need help, professional help. Your father and I will support you through this, but you need to stop now before you face criminal charges. Brenda turned on her mother with surprising venom. Like you ever supported me. You always took everyone else's side. Even when that professor said I cheated, you believed him over me. Even when that boy said I stole his wallet, you believed him. Because you did those things, Nancy replied, her voice breaking. We found the test answers in your backpack. We found that boy's wallet under your bed. We kept making excuses for you, covering for you, paying people off. And look where it got us. Look where it got you. Brenda looked around the room, seeming to realize for the first time that she had lost control of the situation. Her eyes landed on her lawyer, who was quietly packing up his documents, clearly wanting no further part in whatever was unfolding. You can't just leave, she snapped at him. I paid you a $5,000 retainer, which you'll be returning, minus my hourly rate for today, he replied stiffly. I don't represent clients who misrepresent their cases to me. You told me this was a simple family disagreement being blown out of proportion. You didn't mention theft, fraud, or medication tampering. With that, he nodded briefly to the rest of us and walked out, leaving Brenda standing alone in the center of the room. For a moment, she looked small and lost, a glimpse perhaps of the insecure child who had learned to manipulate instead of connect. Then her face hardened. "You'll regret this," she said, looking at each of us in turn. "All of you." She grabbed her purse and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. We sat in stunned silence until Frank spoke up. "I think it's time to contact the police," he said gently. "What we've seen here goes beyond civil disputes. There are criminal issues that need to be addressed." I nodded, feeling suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had kept me going through the confrontation was fading, leaving me drained. David moved to sit beside me, taking my hand in his. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he whispered. "I brought her into our lives. This is my fault." I squeezed his hand. "No, honey. You were taken in by someone who has made deception her life's work. We're going to get through this together." Little did I know that the worst was yet to come. The next morning, I woke to the sound of my security alarm blaring. Disoriented, I fumbled for my phone to call the security company, but before I could dial, I heard a crash from my living room. Someone was in my condo. I locked my bedroom door and called 911, my heart pounding in my chest. The dispatcher assured me police were on their way and instructed me to stay on the line. I could hear drawers being opened and closed, items being thrown around. Then came a sound that made my blood run cold. Someone trying the handle of my bedroom door. "Ivy, I know you're in there," Brenda's voice came through the door. "We're not finished talking. You've ruined everything, and now you're going to fix it." I backed away from the door, telling the dispatcher in a whisper that I knew the intruder. She was my son's estranged wife, and she was unstable. The door handle rattled more violently. "Open this door!" Brenda shouted. "You think you're so clever with your money and your perfect reputation. Everyone needs to know what you really are." I heard sirens in the distance, growing louder. Brenda must have heard them too, because her efforts to break down the door became more frantic. The wood began to splinter around the lock. Just as the door gave way, I heard a commotion in the living room. Male voices shouted, "Police! Freeze!" There was a crash, the sound of running feet, and then silence. I stayed frozen in place until a gentle knock came at my broken door. "Mrs. Matthews?" A police officer called. "Are you all right?" The aftermath of Brenda's break-in was chaotic. She had been arrested at the scene but released on bail within hours. The police found tools in her car suggesting she had planned to break into my home for some time. More disturbing, they found printed copies of my financial records, medical information, and a crude map of my condo with my bedroom clearly marked. A restraining order was quickly granted, but I no longer felt safe in my own home. David insisted I stay with him at the small apartment he had rented after moving out of the house he had shared with Brenda. Laura and Tom offered their guest room as well, but I was reluctant to put any of them at risk if Brenda decided to escalate further. In the end, I checked into a hotel under a different name, with Frank arranging for private security. It felt surreal to be essentially in hiding at 65 years old, all because of someone I'd welcomed into my family. 2 days after the break-in, David called with news that sent another shockwave through our already fragmented lives. "Mom, are you sitting down?" he asked when I answered. "Yes. What's happened now?" Brenda tried to empty my trust fund. All of it. She had forged my signature on transfer documents. If the bank manager hadn't known me personally and thought the signature looked off, she'd have gotten away with it. We're talking about almost $1 million. I felt physically ill. Did she succeed in taking any of it? No. The bank flagged it immediately. But Mom, she also tried to access your accounts. She had your social security number, birth certificate copy, everything she would need for identity theft. The bank has frozen your accounts as a precaution and wants you to come in to verify your identity. The walls seemed to close in around me. How had things spiraled so completely out of control? What had started as petty family tension had escalated into criminal activity, that threatened everything I'd spent my life building. While I was processing this news, my phone beeped with another call. It was Patricia. I told David I'd call him back, and switched over. "Ivy," Patricia said without preamble, "I just got a concerning call from Janet. There's been a break-in at the design firm office. Nothing seems to be missing, but files were disturbed. Specifically, the files from that tax audit in the 90s. I closed my eyes, suddenly understanding Brenda's endgame. "She's looking for ammunition," I said quietly. "Something she can use to threaten me or damage my reputation." "It looks that way," Patricia agreed. "I've advised Janet to move all sensitive documents to secure storage and to upgrade the security system. But Ivy, I think we need to consider going to the FBI at this point. Wire fraud, identity theft, interstate financial crimes, these are federal offenses." I agreed, and Patricia promised to make the necessary calls. As I hung up, my phone immediately rang again. This time it was Frank. "Mrs. Matthews," he said, his voice unusually formal, which told me he was in professional mode. "We've got a situation. Brenda Thompson has just been spotted at Boston Memorial Hospital. She appears to have checked in under your name." My mind raced. Why would she do that? I'm not sure, but my contact says she's claiming chest pains and is using your identification. She's also telling staff that she's estranged from her family due to elder abuse, and that if anyone named David or Ivy Matthews tries to contact her, they should be kept away. The pieces suddenly clicked into place. She was setting up a scenario where she could claim I had tried to harm her, possibly even claim I had impersonated her, while she was impersonating me. The layers of deception were dizzying. The next 12 hours were a blur of police reports, calls to the hospital to alert them to the identity fraud, and emergency meetings with Patricia and Frank to develop a strategy. By evening, Brenda had been arrested again, this time for identity theft and insurance fraud. But the stress of the situation had taken its toll on me. While on the phone with David explaining the latest developments, I felt a crushing pressure in my chest and found it difficult to breathe. My words slurred, and the phone slipped from my hand. The last thing I heard was David's panicked voice calling my name. I woke in a hospital bed, monitors beeping steadily beside me. David was asleep in a chair next to my bed, his face drawn with worry even in sleep. I tried to speak but found my mouth dry and throat sore. The movement must have alerted him, because David jerked awake, his eyes finding mine immediately. "Mom!" he gasped, reaching for my hand. "You're awake. Thank God. What happened?" I managed to croak. A nurse entered before he could answer, alerted by the change in my vital signs. She checked the monitors, gave me some ice chips to suck on, and promised to send the doctor in shortly. "You had a stress-induced cardiac event," David explained once we were alone again. "Not a full heart attack, but serious enough to require monitoring. The doctor said your body was responding to prolonged extreme stress." Tears filled his eyes. "I almost lost you, Mom. All because I brought that woman into our lives." I squeezed his hand weakly. "Not your fault," I whispered. "She's fooled many people." The doctor came in, a kind-faced woman in her 50s who introduced herself as Dr. Martinez. She explained that while my heart had suffered some strain, there was no permanent damage. However, she strongly advised reducing stress and following up with a cardiologist. As she was giving these instructions, a commotion erupted in the hallway. Raised voices argued about visitor access. I recognized one of them immediately, Brenda. David's face hardened. "I'll handle this," he said, stepping out into the hall and closing my door firmly behind him. Through the door, I could hear their voices, though not the exact words. Brenda's tone was insistent, almost frantic. David's was cold and unyielding. The exchange lasted only a minute before security was called. I later learned that Brenda had somehow been released on bail again and had come to the hospital, claiming concern for my condition. In reality, David suspected she wanted to be seen as the caring daughter-in-law to counter the growing legal evidence against her. During my 3-day hospital stay, I had many visitors. Laura and Tom brought flowers and sat with me for hours. Janet came with news that the design firm staff had sent a huge gift basket to my home. Even Walter and Nancy visited briefly, both looking haggard and at least 10 years older than they had at Thanksgiving. On the second day, I received an unexpected visitor. Janet arrived with a woman I didn't recognize, a smartly dressed professional in her 40s who Janet introduced as Melanie Parker. Ivy. Melanie used to work as an assistant at Crawford and Davis law firm about 8 years ago, Janet explained. When I mentioned everything that was happening with Brenda, she had an interesting story to share. Melanie nodded, looking slightly uncomfortable. Miss Thompson asked her to call me Miss Matthews. I don't usually get involved in other people's business, but when Janet mentioned your daughter-in-law's name, something clicked. While I was working at Crawford and Davis, a woman named Belinda Thomas hired the firm to handle her divorce from Stephen Williams. The details Janet shared sounded very similar, and when she showed me a photo, I was certain it was the same woman, just with different hair and name. My interest was piqued. And, I prompted, Miss Williams visited the office often, usually making a scene about how her husband was hiding money and trying to leave her destitute. But one day, I overheard her on her phone in the lobby. She was laughing, telling someone how she had stolen documents from her husband's office that would force him to settle on her terms. She called it her insurance policy, the same phrase Brenda had used. What kind of documents? I asked. Medical records, Melanie replied. Her husband was a surgeon, and she had somehow gotten access to patient files that showed possible medical errors. She was planning to threaten to expose them if he didn't give her the settlement she wanted. The parallel to my situation was chilling. Brenda had been following the same playbook, looking for compromising information she could use as leverage. I thanked Melanie for coming forward with this information. After she left, Janet stayed behind, clearly troubled. Ivy, she said hesitantly, I think you need to know something else. When the break-in happened at the office, I didn't tell you everything. The intruder also accessed our current client files, including the renovation plans for the Westlake executive offices. I frowned, not immediately seeing the significance. Janet leaned closer. Those plans include all the security system details, access codes, and schedule information. The kind of information someone would need if they wanted to get into the building undetected. A cold realization washed over me. Brenda wasn't just looking for information to use against me. She was potentially planning something much more direct. Before I could process this fully, my hospital room door opened again. This time, it was Frank, looking unusually animated. Mrs. Matthews, I have news, he announced. We've found Brenda's real identity. Her name isn't Belinda Thompson or Brenda Thompson. It's Barbara Thorne. She changed her identity after facing charges of fraud and extortion in Oregon 12 years ago. The charges were dropped when the victim, an elderly man she had been caring for, suddenly died of apparent natural causes. The police suspected foul play, but couldn't prove anything. The implication hung heavily in the room. Had Brenda not just been stealing and manipulating, but potentially done worse in her past? While I was still in the hospital, David made a decision. He filed for an emergency protection order, not just for himself, but for me, Laura, Tom, and even Brenda's parents. The evidence of escalating threats and potentially violent intentions was enough for a judge to grant it immediately. The day I was discharged from the hospital, I made a decision of my own. I had spent too much of my life keeping secrets, from my financial success to my concerns about Brenda. That secrecy had allowed problems to fester and grow until they threatened everything and everyone I loved. It's time to bring everything into the light, I told David as he drove me to Laura's house, where I would be staying during my recovery. No more hiding, no more secrets. He glanced at me, surprised by my firm tone. What do you mean? I mean we're going to face this head on. All of us, together. It's the only way to end it for good. The next morning, I called a meeting at Laura's house with everyone who had been affected by Brenda's deceptions. David, Laura, Tom, Janet, Patricia, Frank, and even Walter and Nancy, who had been devastated to learn about their daughter's true identity and history. "I'm tired of being reactive," I announced to the assembled group. "It's time we took control of this situation." Over coffee and Laura's homemade cinnamon rolls, we developed a comprehensive plan. First, Patricia would coordinate with prosecutors to ensure all evidence of Brenda's crimes was properly documented and presented. Frank would continue his investigation, focusing now on finding any accomplices Brenda might have working with her. David would move forward aggressively with divorce proceedings, while Janet would implement enhanced security at the design firm. My role was perhaps the most difficult. I would need to go public with my story, removing the secrecy that had given Brenda power. I would acknowledge my financial status openly, explain the deceptions that had occurred, and make it clear that any further attacks on my family or business would be met with the full force of legal consequence. The plan was set in motion immediately. Within 2 weeks, local and state police had compiled enough evidence to charge Brenda with multiple felonies: identity theft, fraud, breaking and entering, attempted theft of retirement funds, and even attempted poisoning based on the substance she had been planning to add to my medication, which testing revealed would have caused confusion and memory issues consistent with dementia. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the possibility of decades in prison, Brenda finally agreed to a plea deal. She would serve 5 years and pay restitution, followed by probation, during which she would be required to receive psychological treatment. Most importantly, she would have no contact with any member of our family ever again. David, who had been carrying the heaviest burden of guilt throughout the ordeal, finally began to heal. The divorce was granted on grounds of fraud and criminal conduct, with Brenda having no claim to the house or any marital assets given her criminal actions. As for me, I made good on my promise to live more openly. I moved back into my condo after having a state-of-the-art security system installed. I resumed active participation in my design firm, mentoring young designers and using my experience to help the business grow. I established a family trust with clear guidelines and transparency, ensuring that both David and Laura understood exactly what resources were available and how they were to be managed. 6 months after Thanksgiving, we gathered again for a family dinner, this time at my condo. David brought Allison, a kind kindergarten teacher had been dating for a few months. Laura and Tom were there with their children. Even Walter came, though Nancy had moved across the country to be near her sister, the strain of everything that had happened having finally broken their marriage. As we sat around my dining table, enjoying a meal we had all contributed to preparing, I looked at the faces of my family, my real family, bound by love and now strengthened by overcoming adversity together. The wounds inflicted by Brenda were healing. David smiled more easily now. Laura and Tom had become even stronger partners. Walter had found a purpose in volunteering with organizations that helped victims of fraud. For dessert, I served my famous apple pie, the recipe passed down from my grandmother. As we savored the sweet, tangy flavor, I raised my glass in a toast. "To honesty," I said simply, "and to the freedom that comes from standing in your truth." Everyone raised their glasses in response, the simple words carrying the weight of everything we'd learned over the past months. Later that evening, as the gathering wound down and people prepared to leave, David pulled me aside. "Mom," he said quietly, "I want you to know something. When Dad died, he told me to always trust my instincts about people. I didn't listen, and it nearly cost us everything. I won't make that mistake again." I hugged him tightly. "We all make mistakes, David. The important thing is that we learn from them." "And I have," he assured me. "I'm finally listening to that inner voice." 1 year after the infamous Thanksgiving dinner that had changed everything, I stood in front of a group of women at the community center. I'd been invited to speak about financial literacy and independence, particularly for women entering retirement. "Ladies," I began, "my story isn't unique. Many of us hide our accomplishments, our strength, even our financial success, because we've been taught that it's not polite or feminine to acknowledge our power. I told them a simplified version of what had happened with Brenda, how secrecy had allowed deception to flourish, and how being honest about my resources had ultimately been liberating. The truth is, I concluded, your financial independence isn't just about money. It's about having the freedom to make choices, to help those you truly care about, and to protect yourself from those who might try to take advantage of you. It's about standing in your power unapologetically. The response was overwhelming. Women lined up to share their own stories of financial manipulation, of hiding their success to make others comfortable, of doubting their instincts when something felt wrong in a relationship. I realized that my experience, painful as it had been, could serve a purpose greater than I had imagined. By sharing it, I was helping others recognize and avoid similar situations. It gave meaning to the suffering we had endured. That evening, I returned home to find a package waiting at my door. Inside was a jewelry box, my mother's jewelry box, that had been among the items Brenda had stolen. David had tracked it down at a pawn shop 2 states away, and had been waiting for the legal issues to be resolved before reclaiming it. I opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were the familiar pieces my mother had treasured: her pearl earrings, the locket with my father's photo, the charm bracelet she had added to every year of their marriage. And at the bottom, still intact, were the handwritten love notes my father had written her during their courtship. Tears filled my eyes as I read his youthful declarations of love and commitment. In one, he had written, "The greatest gift we can give each other is honesty. Without it, love has no foundation on which to grow." How right he had been. The secrecy he had maintained for so many years, however well-intentioned, had created fertile ground for deception and manipulation. By contrast, the honesty and transparency of the past year had strengthened our family bonds beyond what I could have imagined. Today, 2 years after that fateful Thanksgiving, life has found a new and better normal. David and Allison are engaged, planning a small wedding for the spring. Laura's oldest started college this fall, and Tom received a promotion at work. I split my time between consulting for the design firm and teaching financial literacy courses for women. My relationship with money has changed too. I still live relatively modestly. It's a personal preference, not a disguise, but I no longer hide my success or resources. I use my wealth thoughtfully to support causes I believe in, and to help my family when appropriate, always with clear communication and boundaries. Most importantly, I've learned to trust my instincts. That quiet inner voice that whispers warnings when something isn't right is wisdom accumulated over decades of living. Ignoring it doesn't make us polite, or accommodating it makes us vulnerable. If my experience has taught me anything, it's this: stand firmly in your truth, acknowledge your worth, trust your instincts, and never, ever let anyone make you feel small for taking up the space you deserve in this world. So what about you? Have you ever had to stand up for yourself against someone who tried to diminish your worth? How did you find the courage to speak your truth? I'm always inspired by hearing how others have found their voice in difficult situations. Please share your experiences in the comments below. Like this video if it resonated with you. Subscribe for more stories of strength and resilience, and share it with someone who might need to hear this message today. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, your truth is your power. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.